Today's Wednesday. And Wednesday we do Parsha, Be'ezrat Hashem. Now, of course, we all know the story. In short, the kid says, we think of Golus Mitzrayim as two Goliaths. The first Golus Mitzrayim is Parshas Vayeshev Miketz Vayigesh Vayechi. It's the Golus of the brothers, who live a long time. They live close to 100 years in Mitzrayim. The last of the brothers to pass away is Levi. He dies, according to the cheshbonos that I brought in the Seforna, 94 years after the Yidden come to Mitzrayim. He lives 137 years, so you can do the math. He came to Mitzrayim when he was like 43 years old. He lived in Mitzrayim for about 94 years, and then he passes away. And that's when all the tzaras start. It says in the Sifsei Chachamim, the Golus Mitzrayim is 116 years. And of course, the second Golus is the children. After Vayomas, Yossi, V'chalacha, V'chala Deirahu, Yosef dies and his brothers die, and the generation dies. Ubnei Yisrael, Paru, Vayishut, so then they start having lots and lots of children, and start lots and lots of tzaras, and so on. Now, of these 116 years, it says in Chazal, it says in Sforim, that the Yidden were tricked, right? Hovanas Chakmale. It wasn't just that they enslaved Jews. There was a whole scheme, a whole trick, how they got the Yidden into a state of slavery. And this took 30 years. So for 30 years, the slavery was as a kumsi kumsa abyssal. And on that basis, we know that the full Golus Mitzrayim is 86 years, Pei Vav Shonim, which I'm sure you know is B'gematria Shem Elikim Aleph Lamed, Hey Yud Mem, which is the gematria of HaTeva. Golus Mitzrayim was 86 years. And of course, whose life represents the Golus? Miriam. Miriam lived in Mitzrayim 86 years. When Yidden left Mitzrayim, Miriam was 86 years old. Her name Miriam was given because when she was born, there was an understanding that the Golus is now going to get much, much worse. And the word Miriam, ironically or not so ironically, means bitter, bitter. She was given the name Miriam because Miriam means bitter.
She was born the year Levi died. Why are we still giving the name Miriam?
Why are we still giving the name Miriam? Why would they name a child Miriam? In anticipation of the merirus, of the bitterness of the time that's going to come. Now we know from other sources that the word mar, besides meaning bitter, also means a drop. Hein goyim kemar midli. Mar means mayim, a drop of water. So maybe there's another spin. But the 86 years from the time Miriam was born till the Yidden left Mitzrayim was Gehenim. In my imagining, when I use my imagination, which is considerable and not necessarily accurate, I imagine Golus Mitzrayim being like Auschwitz. But not Auschwitz for 5 years, Auschwitz for 86 years, for generations. They lived based on what they call a death diet, a diet that was going to keep them alive, so they could work until they would die. And Yidden multiplied. Under the worst conditions, Yidden had tons of children. No matter how difficult they made it, Yidden kept having children. And the Eibush, so last week's Parsha, Parsha Shmois, is a very bitter Parsha. It's the Parsha of the Golus and the Tzaras. Then comes our Parsha, Parshas Vaera. Vaera is already the beginning of the Geulah, right? We all know the story. Moshe Rabbeinu was about 15 years old, or something like that, when he runs away from Mitzrayim, a young guy. He disappears for 65 years. I should one day do this, but there's a Sefer HaYoshar, which is one of the oldest Midrashim, that tells the story of Moshe Rabbeinu's 65 years when he was away from Mitzrayim. For 40 of them, he was a king in Kush. He was a king in West Africa. He was a king, in East Africa. He was a king in Ethiopia, which is directly beneath Mitzrayim, beneath Egypt. And the only reason he left was because they wanted to put pressure on him to marry, and he wasn't going to marry a person from Chom. So he left, then he goes to Midian, he spends a bunch of years by Yisrael. First he's in jail, and then he marries Tzipoido, all kinds of stuff. And when he's 80 years old, he meets the Eibush at the burning bush, and the Eibush tells Moshe Rabbeinu, take Yidden out of Mitzrayim. And of course, one of Moshe Rabbeinu's big arguments with the Eibush was, I lived, as they say in English, fat on the hog. I didn't suffer a day in my life. My childhood was spent in a palace. When it became a little hot in the kitchen and left Mitzrayim, I was a king for 40 years, a Machaya. I'm going to be the Redeemer. My sister, my brother, Miriam and Aaron HaKoyen, Miriam and Avi and Aaron HaKoyen, suffered with Yidden all of these years. And I'm going to come out of the wilderness and I'm going to be the Redeemer and they're going to be my subordinates. Moshe Rabbeinu doesn't make sense. So of course in last week's Parsha, Hashem tells Moshe Rabbeinu, you know what, go see what happens. Go see how your brother's going to react to the news that you're the Goyal and he's your assistant. And Vaera v'samach b'libei, Aaron had absolutely no tina. Aaron was a smart guy. He knew the worst thing in the world was to be the king. The second in command is okay, as long as the limelight is not on you. He's very, very happy that Moshe Rabbeinu lead. But the Rebbe has a siche, which is fascinating, where the Rebbe says that in order to take Yidden out of Golus, you couldn't have a Golus mentality. You couldn't have a Golus thinking. Which is why Davka, someone who did not spend his whole life in Mitzrayim, was able to be redeeming the Yidden. That's why Moshe Rabbeinu, who spent almost all of his life outside of Egypt, was the one who came redeeming the Jewish people. And in the beginning of the Parsha, there's all kinds of details, right? That Hashem says, I'm going to use Shem Havayeh, I'm not just going to use Shem Shaddai, and other things. But one of the classic features of Parshas Vaera, one of the classic features of Parshas Vaera, every child learns this when they're little kids in school, is the Daled L'Shein Shel Geulah, Vihotzasi, Vihotzasi, V'Ga'alti, Vilakachti. Right? Every kid goes to school, he comes home with 4 crowns, right? Or the crown with 4 sides. That the Yidden, that the Hashem promised the Jewish people, He's going to take them out of Mitzrayim with Daled L'Shein Shel Geulah. And of course, those Daled L'Shein Shel Geulah become the 4 cups of wine that we drink by the Seder. And some kids, when they're young, they have the first cup is Vihotzasi, the second cup is Vihotzasi, the third cup is V'Ga'alti, and the fourth cup is Vilakachti. And the kids who have really good teachers tell them, wait, there's the 5th cup. And the 5th cup is Vehevesi. And some people say that the 5th cup goes in Eliyahu HaNavi. The Rebbe has a siche where the Rebbe says there's a 5th cup which was not Eliyahu HaNavi's cup, the 5th cup that was filled up to the brim, and it was kept on the Seder table, and it wasn't drunk, was poured back into the bottle. But there's a lot of, everybody knows about the Daled L'Shein Shel Geulah, Vihotzasi, Vihotzasi, V'Ga'alti, Vilakachti, 4 expressions of Geulah. And of course, I mean, if you could imagine being in Mitzrayim and suffering terribly, and then finally Moshe Rabbeinu comes along and he says, Pakod Pakadati Eschem, he uses the code, right? Yidden had a code. Moshe Yosef Atzadik, 2 weeks ago, in the end of Parshas Vayechi, tells the Jewish people a code. Pakod Yifkei Delakim Eschem. If someone comes along and he says to you the word Pei Kuf Daled, Pakod, the word Pakod has many translations. Pakod means to remember, Pakod means to pay attention to, Pakod means to count. If someone comes along and uses a double lashon, Pakod Yifkei, Pakod Efkei, Pakod Pakadati, you'll know this is the Redeemer. Yet Moshe Rabbeinu comes along, it's so many years since Yosef died. And he uses the code, Pakod Pakadati. The Yidden hear the code and say, it's finally happening after all of those tzaddis. And Moshe says, but the Geulah happens in 4 steps. If you were Yidden, the Gemara says actually, the Rebbe brings this in, but the Gemara says that Hashem tells Moshe Rabbeinu, tell the Yidden, they should borrow from their neighbors. So when they go out of Mitzrayim, they're going to have what to eat, they'll be rich. So Moshe Rabbeinu comes to the Yidden, and he says to the Yidden, you've been suffering for all of these years, whatever, 210 years. 116 years, 86 years, whatever the numbers are. Stick around for a little while and borrow. And the Yidden say, are you nuts? Forget the borrowing, forget the wealth, let's get out today. When people suffer, the way Yidden suffered in Mitzrayim, the last thing on their mind was wealth. Naturally, when it was all over, they were very happy to have the wealth, especially when you learn the Chassidus and the Kabbalah, that the wealth in Mitzrayim was ruchnius, was birurim, it was the elevation of sparks. But nobody in his right mind would spend 1 more minute in Golus to have a couple more dollars. So this business with the Daled L'Shein Shel Geulah, Hashem is not taking Yidden out of Mitzrayim, He's taking Yidden out of Mitzrayim in 4 steps. Vihotzasi, first I'm taking you out. Vihotzasi, and then I'm going to save you. And by the way, it says in Chassidus that Vihotzasi is from the word shale, which means shadow. I'm going to get to it in a moment. V'Ga'alti, I'm going to redeem you. Vilakachti, I'm going to take you to me. And then finally, the 5th lashon of Geulah is Vehevesi Eschem Al Ha'aretz. I'm going to bring you into the land. It's a classic case of who cares, really. If you think about Golus Mitzrayim seriously, and you think about what it meant that Yidden were taken out of Mitzrayim, what the 4 expressions? And the 4 expressions usually mean 4 stages. There's going to be a first stage of Geulah, a second stage of Geulah, and a third stage of Geulah. And the question is, why they're so important? Why are these 4 stages such a big deal? Why are these 4 stages such a big deal? In other words, the Yidden say, just get us out of Mitzrayim, forget the stages. We don't need steps. Just take us out of Mitzrayim, make our life free, allow us to breathe. Why do you have these stages? So this is my topic, Chavra. My topic for tonight, in plain English, in plain Hebrew, in plain Polish, and Portuguese, and Mandarin, and whatever it is, the Spanish, and Italian, and Portuguese, and the Hungarian, and Yugoslavian, and Romanian, and whatever else you want, is the Daled L'Shein Shel Geulah, the 4 expressions of Geulah. And I'm going to start from the very simple, and as it turns out, the simplest Pshat on the Daled L'Shein Shel Geulah is a Zohar. The simplest Pshat on the Daled L'Shein, in other words, of all the people who talk about the Daled L'Shein Shel Geulah, the Pshat Shebe Pshat is a Zohar. Because the Zohar says a Pashta Kasha. Look at the 4 expressions. Vihotzasi means what? Translate. I'm taking you out of the land. Vihotzasi means I'm going to save you. V'ga'alti means I'm going to redeem you. Now, which happens first? Which happens first? In Pshat Seichel. If Hashem says, I'm going to help you, but he uses 4 different words for help, which would be the first, which would be the second, which would be the third? The first word should be Vihotzasi, I'm going to save you. The second word should mean V'ga'alti, should redeem you. Then comes Vihotzasi, then I'm going to take you out of Mitzrayim. So why is the Seder, first Vihotzasi, I'm taking you out of Mitzrayim. Then Vihotzasi, then I'm going to save you, which happens while you're still in Mitzrayim. Then V'ga'alti, I'm going to redeem you, which also happens when you're in Mitzrayim. So why is the Seder Vihotzasi first?
Chased them after he brought them out.
Yeah,
They still needed saving.
Let's just say
Like
you
you're
save
in a burning
someone
building.
from prison, you grab him, you take him out, that's what he says.
No.
But he's still in danger.
How?
The cops are chasing him, whatever it is.
Anyway, the Zohar, a lot of the Rishonim say you're Pshatim. But the Zohar says a very, very simple thing. That the first thing Hashem tells the Yidden is the bottom line. Vihotzasi Taka happens, according to the Zohar, after Vihotzasi and after V'ga'alti. First you save them, then you redeem them, and then you remove them from the land. But the Eibishter, the first thing the Eibishter tells Moshe Rabbeinu is tell Yidden, I'm taking them out of this place. And then he tells them the process. In other words, chronologically, according to the Zohar, first Hashem saves us, then Hashem redeems us, then Hashem removes us from the land, and then he takes us and he makes us his. But the Torah puts Vihotzasi first, even though chronologically it happens third, is because the Torah wants to tell Yidden the end. The end game is you're going to go out of Mitzrayim. So this Zohar is interesting. The Zohar is saying that the first Besura is for what's going to be in the final end. I'm going to physically remove you from this land. Then he says, and while you're in the land, I'm going to save you and I'm going to protect you. And while you're in this land, I'm going to redeem you. And then I'm going to take you out. And Vilakachti, I'm going to make you mine. So the Zohar follows up this kasha with a second kasha. Also very logical. It's the last Zohar in Parshas Vaera, and it's very Pshat. If you ever look in Zohar in Parshas Vaera, there's a lot of Zohar in Parshas Vaera. But the whole Zohar is in the first few psukim. The rest of the Parshas is no Zohar at all. You have maybe, a lot of pages of Zohar. It all goes in the first couple of pages. The last shtickle, it's a small little piece, is on the Daled L'Shein Shel Geulah. According to this, the Zohar has a kasha. L'chaira, if you have people who are slaves, and you give them a Besura Teva, I'm going to give you freedom. What is the greatest Besura you could give them? Not I'm taking you away from your slavery. I'm going to give you a new life. So the Zohar, second kasha is, if the Seder, the Daled L'Shein Shel Geulah, isn't chronological, the 4 expressions of Geulah, not written in the order that they happen, but they're in the order that would be most important for the Jewish people, the first Lashon should be Vilakachti. Vilakachti means, I'll put it to you in historic terms, I'm not going to redeem you like Lincoln freed the slaves. Lincoln freed the slaves and they got killed. If Lincoln had lived, the history of America would have been very different. Would have been very, very different. Lincoln freed the slaves and then they remained slaves for another 100 years. In some parts of America, the African Americans had a terrible time for it, even after they were freed from slavery. Because you don't make a person have a good life by taking away his master. You give a person a good life by giving him opportunity. So the Zohar says, if the order of the Daled L'Shein of Geulah is not chronological, it should first of all say Vilakachti. Vilakachti asks him, I'm going to give you a new identity. I'm going to make you my nation. Then Vihotzasi, I'm going to take you out of the land. And then Vihotzasi Vilakachti Geulah. In other words, if the psukim are not telling you the sequence of how it's going to happen in time, but how it's going to happen in priority, the greatest thing a slave wants to hear is, I'm going to make you a free man. Now I'm going to take away your master. I'm going to make you a free man. That's Vilakachti.
I was saying Vilakachti saving you.
I'm going to make you mine.
Right, but you're not. That's just saying you're going to be under me.
That's right. That's going to be your freedom. That's going to be your freedom, right? If you leave Germany, it's very important to say, now I'm an American. Not, I'm no longer a German. Right? By becoming an American, you're not a slave. It's your identity. Jews came out of the Second World War and they lived in camps because they had no passports until countries had all kinds of quotas and how they raised their refugee status, immigration status. The Jewish people got into those countries. You can ask my father. My father spent from 1946 until 1953 countryless and penniless. They were not even allowed to work in France. They were supposed to live on the dole. They were supposed to live on charity, which meant, you understand, nobody had anything. They didn't have shoes. Not in Russia, in France. So the Zohar asks, if the four Lashonos of Geulah do not grow in the order of chronology, the first thing is Vilakachti. I'm going to give you a new identity. I'm going to give you a new passport. Then Vihotzasi, I'm going to physically remove you from this land. And then Vihotzasi, I'm going to save you. That means I'm going to protect Mitzrayim from beating you up. V'ga'alti, I'm going to redeem you. Those things happen earlier chronologically, but they're less important in terms of the overall scheme of freedom. And the Zohar says again, a very practical answer. When you're a slave and you're living in a slave condition, you're not thinking about your new country. You're not thinking about what passport you're going to get next. Take, the ultimate event of freedom is Vilakachti Eschem Lila that instead of being a slave in Egypt, you're not going to be a nobody, you're going to be a Jew. But the Yidden were not thinking like that. Yidden at that time were thinking, I got to get out of here. If I have to get out of here, the most important thing is Vihotzasi. Once they would get out, they would realize that this is not enough. Not to be in Mitzrayim is not enough. I need a new country. So then comes the Vilakachti. So the Zohar says that the order of the Daled L'Shonos Shel Geulah reflects the thinking of Yidden. It's mamish a moedenik, it's a Pshat. It's a very Pshatish shtikel Zohar. In terms of the most important thing, Vilakachti should have come first. But in terms of what Yidden were thinking, while they were in Mitzrayim, all they were thinking was, I got to get out of here. So Hashem says, Vihotzasi. But how am I going to get out of here? Vihotzasi. First I'm going to save you. V'ga'altim, then I'm going to redeem you. And then I'm going to eventually take you out of the land. And when you can come out of this country, you're going to realize that this is not enough. It's not enough for a slave not to have a master. You need to be free. And that's why the Vilakachti is last. So Take, in terms of the higoyin of the Daled L'Shonos Shel Geulah, Vilakachti should have been mentioned first. But because of the condition of Yidden in Mitzrayim, Vilakachti is mentioned last. Of all the Pirushim that I looked at, the Zohar is the most down-to-earth. It's the most practical and down-to-earth Pshat. Hashem is going to do a series of things to make Yidden free, and He presents it to them in the order that they're thinking about it. Number one, they're leaving this place. Number 2 and 3, how they're leaving this place. And number 4, what's going to happen to them after they leave. Go ahead, Aryeh, Harav Aryeh, Reb Aryeh, Harav Reb Aryeh.
What's the difference between Vilakachti and Vihotzasi? Really,
Vihotzasi means I'm taking you out of Egypt. Vilakachti means I'm making you mine. Vihotzasi means I'm taking you out of Auschwitz. Vilakachti means I'm making you an American citizen, or an Israeli citizen, or an Australian citizen, or a citizen of Brazil, or Argentina, or whatever.
I mean, you're really saying Vilakachti is as if should have taken them out.
No, Vilakachti eschem liliyam. I'm going to take you and make you mine. You have to read the whole sequence, the whole puzzle.
Took them from, I'm saying,
And I'm going to make you mine. Vilakachti doesn't mean I'm going to take you out. I'm going to take you to me. I'm going to make you mine. So it's interesting that of all the Mefarshim, the most pshatish is a Zohar in this particular case. Now, having said the Zohar, I want to move on to the Ramban. Okay? The Ramban disagrees with the Zohar. And he says that the 4 expressions, Vihotzasi, I'm going to take you out, Vihotzasi, and I'm going to save you. V'ga'alti, and I'm going to redeem you. Vilakachti, I'm going to make you mine, is in chronological order. And here's how he explains it. Vihotzasi means I'm going to take you out of the land physically. By taking you out of the physical place of Mitzrayim, they can't hit you anymore. But as you mentioned, a few of you mentioned, yeah. But the Eibishter physically takes Yidden out of Mitzrayim, and the Mitzrayim chase him and send arrows. So you have to have Vihotzasi. Vihotzasi means that I'm going to take you physically out of the land, and when you leave, I'm going to save you that the Egyptians should have no hold on you after you leave the land. So the Ramban holds that this is in order. But he says, I'm going to physically remove you from the land. But after you leave the land, maybe the Egyptians are going to come after you. Vihotzasi, I'm going to save you from any influence of the Egyptians. Wait, but that's not enough. Hashem physically takes them out of the land. That's step one. He protects them from any influence of the Egyptians, right? But Egypt still exists, and Egypt is still a superpower. And Egypt is still an entity that the Jewish people had reasons to fear. So it says V'ga'alti. So the Ramban gives a weird Pshat V'ga'alti. I'm going to make Egypt suffer. I'm going to make Egypt suffer. V'ga'alti, I'm going to redeem you and make Egypt suffer. What does Egyptian suffering have to do with the redemption of the Jewish people? So the Ramban says, I'm going to make Egypt suffer so that Egypt is going to want to redeem themselves from their suffering. They're not going to want to suffer anymore. So they're not just going to tolerate the fact that you left. They're not just going to leave you alone completely, but they're going to give you your freedom. V'ga'alti, the Ramban teaches, I'll make Egypt suffer. How does Egyptian suffrage have to do with V'ga'alti? So he teaches, Yasa behem shvatim, Acheyemru hamitziyim hini lecha yisrael b'pidyon nafshelu. Those are his words. Egypt is going to suffer, and they're going to say, I don't want to suffer anymore. Yidden, hear it, take all the freedom you want, so my suffering should go away. So the Ramban explains it as three sequential steps. A, he physically takes them out of the land. B, he protects them from Egypt coming after them. C, he makes Egypt be happy that the Jews are leaving. Happy, I'm happy that you're free. That's Geulah in the lighting of the Ramban. Why is Egypt happy that the Yidden are free? Because Egypt is suffering, and they figured that if the Yidden are going to be free, the suffrage is going to stop. So they say, it's a pidyon nafshenu. We're actually granting you your freedom so that we shouldn't suffer anymore. And then Vilakachti teaches the Ramban has a lot of a farshim teich. Matan Teda. You know, making you free is one thing. Making you mine is quite another. When do Yidden become the nation of HaKadosh Baruch Hu? The Eibishter gives them the Torah. So the Ramban says it in order. Taking you physically out of the land, removing any hold of the Egyptians upon you, making the Egyptians happy that you're free, and then making you mine with the Sinas HaTeirah. The third Pirush I'm going to give, and I almost never quote him, is the Seforna. I have Moshe Rav Kook's Chumash. Moshe Rav Kook made of it. I mean, it's a modern Moshe Rav Kook are, strictly academics. They have no mushy feeling. There's no, they don't have Lachain Emor because they have nice Pirushim. Moshe Rav Kook made a Pirush of Chumash with all the Rishonim. They didn't put that on Rabbi Achei in, and I'm never going to forgive them for that. But aside from the Rabbi Achei, they put in all the Rishonim. And yeah, I'll tell you the reason. Because it's Pshat so big. It would make the Svarim too large. That's the only explanation. But they have, Of course it's a Rav Kook. Shavel's Rabbeinu B'chai is all Rav Kook. It's all Rav Kook. But the Seforna they have. Listen to this. The Seforna from the Rishonim. Vihotzasi means the day the Makkah starts. The way Dam starts, the slavery ends. Vihotzasi doesn't take you out of the land. I'm taking you out of physical labor. Like Chazal say that 6 months before Yidden left Mitzrayim, the slavery stopped. The Seforna said as soon as Makkah's Dam happened, as soon as the Egyptians began to suffer, Vihotzasi, the Yidden stopped working. Vihotzasi means I'm going to take you out of slavery the day the Makkah started. Vihotzasi, I'm going to save you, he says. These are his words, B'yom Ramses, in the day of Ramses. There's a reason I'm saying Ramses. A big controversy. It means the day they left Mitzrayim physically. When they crossed the border from inside Mitzrayim to outside Mitzrayim, that's when he saved them. V'ga'alti, when do I redeem you? When the Egyptians drowned in the sea, as they touched. And the Pshat of this, the Seforna's reason for redemption is, How do you know you're free? How do you know you're free? That there's no way for your master to come and take you back. There's no better way to ascertain, to guarantee that your master can't come and take you back than if your master's dead. Keep shooting. So V'ga'alti means Kriyas Yamsuf, when the Egyptians drowned. And Vilakachti, he agrees with the Ramban. Vilakachti means Matan Torah. So both the Seforna and the Ramban, so to speak, disagree with the Zohar, and they say that these four expressions are in chronological order. Vihotzasi means when the first Makkah starts. Vihotzasi means when Yidden physically leave Mitzrayim. V'ga'alti means when the Egyptians die and they can't pursue the Jews anymore. And Vilakachti, he says, is a Maimed Har Sinai. Now, there's, like I said to you before, there's a lot of different little insights about the Dal L'Shoyne Shal Geulah. I'm just going to share one with you. There's a Sefer which is Beleket, Beis Lamed Kuf Tes. I don't know what that is. It's a Midrash of some sort. Menachem Kasha brings it in one of the Ha'aris on the Dal L'Shoyne Geulah in our Parsha. And he says, why are there four expressions of Geulah? Because the Yidden in Mitzrayim had four Zechusim, that's what he says. Why are there four expressions of Geulah? Because Yidden had four Zechusim. Zechus number one, they didn't change their language. For not changing the language, Hashem said, I'm going to take you out. Number two, they didn't change their clothes. So they didn't change their clothes. Number three is the Lachain is Leigilu Asaseid. Their third zechus is they didn't reveal the secret. What's the secret? So he says that the secret is that they should borrow. When Moshe said to the Yidden they should borrow, that was the first thing he told them. Last week they were already told to borrow. As soon as Moshe shows up, borrow. Borrow, hoard, take. You pay it back tomorrow. If the Yidden tell Mitzrayim that, we're borrowing for keeps because we're taking a long trip and we're never coming back, they kept, he says, they didn't reveal the secret. And he says, like it says in the Pasuk, Vishal Isha, they should borrow. I'm not sure if this is the Pshat, but when you read the words from this one line in the footnote of the Menachem Kasher Sefer Teda Shleima, this is the impression that you got. 1 second. And the fourth schus, Chavra, was the schus of Bris Milah. He says that Yidden in Mitzrayim did a bris. And those were their four schusim. The Shinu was L'Shoyim, they changed their language, they didn't change their dress. They kept the secret and they did bris. Now, Chavra, you have to understand that this Pirush is very, very anomalous. It's very unusual. Because one of the things that we always say about Yetzias Mitzrayim was that they had to do Korban Pesach, and you couldn't do Korban Pesach without a bris. So there was a mass circumcision. According to Pshat Mishal Dvarim, when you read the Haggadah Shal Pesach, that we had two schusim, Mizbeis ve'erech, ve'ever alayach ve'eres, Mizbeiseses b'demoyech. I see you're wallowing in your blood. What's your blood? Dam Pesach and Dam Milah. There's a presumption that Yidden in Mitzrayim did not do a bris. And right before they left Mitzrayim, since it says an uncircumcised person can't eat a Korban Pesach, and his family can't eat a Korban Pesach, there was a collective circumcising before they left Egypt. And by the way, there was another occasion of collective circumcising when they went into Yisrael. Yidden crossed the Yarden on Yud Nisan. That year, Yudal Nisan, 4 days later, they brought a Korban Pesach, and those 3 days, all the Jewish people were circumcised because of the Midbar, except for Shevet Levi, like Rashi says in Beracha. Yidden did not do a bris. But this guy holds, Yud Lamed Kuf Tes, whoever he is, that Yidden did do a bris in Mitzrayim. So they had four zechusim, and for the four zechusim they got the Dal L'Shoyne Shal Geulah. You were going to say, I apologize, you were going to say.
I was one of this person that lied to the Egyptians. What was this question?
How was one of the zechusim that they lied to the Egyptians? You should know that in Germany, it was against the law to hide Jews. It was illegal. And you go to Yad Vashem, they have a place where they honor the righteous Gentiles. Amongst the righteous Gentiles, that they honor the righteous Gentiles in Germany who killed Jews. Why are you honoring people who broke the law?
It's a difference between breaking
Is
the
it?
law. You're breaking the law to save a life, you're breaking the law to benefit from taking money.
You're breaking a law to do what God said. You're breaking a law to do what God said. And frankly, I don't know how to tell this to you, but come on. The Gemara says, The Gemara says that in the times of Alexander Smugdun, Alexander the Great, when he sort of ruled the whole world. And by the way, the story of Alexander, I once mentioned this in a previous class, the story of Alexander in Israel, nobody knows. There's no historic record of it. Alexander Mugdin came from Macedon, northern Greece. And he went along the coast. He went through Turkey, along the coast. He came down through Sidon, through what's now Lebanon. He passed Israel, and he came to Egypt. And he had a philosophy. Alexander the Great had a very simple philosophy. If he came to your country and you opened up the gates, he didn't kill a soul. He just included you in his empire. The kingdom was erased, and you became a member of the greater empire of Alexander, etc., and so forth. But no one knows what happened in Israel. There's no record. The only thing we know is they didn't kill Jews. In the Gemara, there's a few stories about Alexander the Great. One of the stories about Alexander the Great that's told, but the Egyptians called the Yidden to the court of Alexander the Great. They should pay back all the money they borrowed. Yes? They're not Mitzrayim. They came to Alexander Smugdun and they said the Jews left Egypt. It says in their Bible. They're not even denying it, those Ganovim. Yeah, that they stole our wealth. We want it back. And I'm telling you, it's not so far-fetched from someone who's saying, how could you honor Germans who helped Jews? It was against the law in Germany to help a Jew. It was illegal. This whole shtick about legalities, when people are cruel and unreasonable, and people are illegal.
I'm not saying legality. It says even though God said, He also writes later in the Torah that you can't steal.
So how do you figure that out?
Didn't exist yet.
How do you figure? Anyway, the end of the story was the Nanashi Egyptians set up a committee. They brought a team of lawyers, and they went to Alexander the Great, and they sued the Jews. And the Jews panicked. There's 3 stories in the Gemara, one after the next, of different groups of people who came to the Jewish people to collect wealth. And it was the Shnas Shemitah. There was no food in Eretz Yisrael because you couldn't plant and harvest. And there was a guy, who knows his name? Huh? Cripple, yeah, Vita Gehesen. I never remember his name. The Rebbe once told the story of Fabrengen. It was Chav Gimel Sivan. And I remember the Gemara, but I remember the Rebbe talking about it. He says, I'll represent him. He says to the Egyptians, he says, you give me a bill for everything we borrowed and I'll pay it back. You just give me a receipt for the fair market value, and it was over 1,000 years of inflation. I'll pay you every penny. He says, but one thing. I'm going to give you a bill for 210 years of slavery, and for violence, and for abuse, and for murder, and da-da-da-da-da. You give me your bill, I'll give you my bill, and we'll deduct from what you owe me, what I owe you, and just pay me the difference. So the Egyptians ran away, but Alexander was a king. And Alexander was enforcing the law. So they couldn't just walk out and say, the suit is off. You know, when you come into a court and you sign papers. So the Egyptians made a lawsuit, the Jews countersued, and Alexander says, pay up. So the Egyptians ran away and they left fields full of food. And the Jewish people benefited from this shtick incredibly. Why the Yidden borrowed from the Egyptians? The only reason a slave would not take from his master when he's going free is because he doesn't have the presence of mind. Hashem forced the Jews not to lose their heads. Imagine being a slave, and you have a chance to leave, you're going to grab whatever you can take. You know how slaves are abused? They're treated like chattel, like animals. But most slaves that have a chance to leave their masters are not thinking about taking a piece of silver. They want to get a minute quitter. David says, no, take. Anyway, let's move on. Then there's a Maimir. It's a classic Maimir. I want you to know the Maimir Lachain Emor you have from a lot of the Rabbeim. The Rebbe Rashab has it, the Fidik Rebbe has it, the Rebbe has it, where he explains the Dalad L'Shoina Shel Geulah Api Chasidus. Not to get too technical for a number of reasons, including the fact that I'm also 1 o'clock. In davening in the morning, we say Emes 8 times. That's what it says in Kabbalah. If you count and you only find 7, come talk to me in private. You have 4 times Emes, from Emes V'Yasif till Zulasecha Selah. And then you have 4 times Emes in Ezra. You have a total of 8 times Emes. So it says in Kisvei Harizal that the word Emes, the 8 times Emes, correspond to the Dalud L'Shoina Shel Geulah, the 4 expressions of Geulah when Yidden left Mitzrayim the first time. And the second 4 times Emes, which is in Ezra, correspond to the Dalud L'Shoina Shel Geulah that the Yidden are going to have when Mashiach comes. And the Maimon explains Vihotzasi, Vihotzalti, Viga'alti, Vilakachti in 4 steps of tshuva. Right? Bechlal, tshuva has 2 parts. And of course in Chassidus, Every time you have two becomes 4, and 4 becomes 8, and 8 becomes 16. Leave it to the Jews, yeah? You have 2 kinds of tshuva. What's 2 kinds of tshuva? First kind of tshuva, that did something wrong, I got to fix it. The second kind of tshuva is, I stopped thinking about Hashem. Because if I'm thinking about Hashem, I'm not doing anything wrong. So when you're doing tshuva, you're doing tshuva tata, not to do anything wrong. And tshuva ilah, what's that tshuva ilah? To think about the Eibishter. So he says that the 4 expressions, Vihotzasi, Vihitzalti, Viga'alti, Vilakachti, are 4 stages in the person going away from bad behavior, person going away from sin. And he connects it to the pasuk, Sur Meira is Vihotzasi, Asei Tov is Vihitzalti, Bakish Shalom is Viga'alti, and Viratfeu is Vilakachti. And like I said, I don't have that much time. I'll just tell you the Nekudas Hadavar. When a person has a bad behavior, what's the most important thing? Stop it! Stop it! Nobody cares why. If you're doing bad, if you're a drug addict, what's the most important thing? Stop taking drugs. That's it. That's the most important thing. That's why he takes. Stop it now. There's no way to stay stopped. If you've got a bad behavior and someone says stop it, thank you very much. Thank you for the answers. You know, I love when people don't do it. Stop it. Stop it. Stop it. I can't stop it. So after you stop the bad behavior, you have to keep the bad behavior stopped. And there's only one way to keep the bad behavior stopped, by doing good behavior. So the very first thing you have to do is stop the bad behavior. Let's talk about Yidden Mitzrayim. Yidden Mitzrayim became shakur and avodah zarah. They became so shakur and avodah zarah, so immersed in idol worship, they couldn't tell the Jewish from the Egyptian apart. Vihotzasi, I'm going to separate from Egypt. You're going to stop being pagan. How? Vihitzalti. You're going to start worshiping God. You're going to start doing good things. That's the sequence. Vihotzasi, I'm going to take you out of the bad behavior. Vihitzalti means I'm going to bring you into a good behavior. You're going to do good things. But action is not enough. Action is not enough. In order to be in a good state, in a sustainable way, in a lasting way, that you shouldn't fall back into your bad behavior, you need a positive focus. So the sequence is, Vihotzasi, I'm going to stop the actions that are not good. Vihitzalti, I'm going to begin actions that are good. Viga'alti means I'm going to redeem you. Viga'alti means I'm going to expose you to Hashem. And I'm going to allow you to feel, to understand, Bina, to understand Him. And understanding Hashem, you're not only going to stop the bad behavior and do good behavior, you're going to have the fortitude, the strength to stay in a good place. Okay? But that's not the end. Hashem takes away our bad behavior. He gives us a good behavior. He allows us to come into His sphere. We should think and understand Him, which protects us. And the last stage, which corresponds to the letter Yud, Yud Kei Vav Kei, right? So Vihotzasi is the lower Hey, and Vihitzalti is the Vav, and Viga'alti is the first Hey, and the Vilakachti is the Yud. Says the Rebbe that Vilakachti means the Eibishter brings you into His presence. You're standing in front of Him. In technical language, it's called Yirei Law, meaning not only are you understanding Hashem, and then you're understanding Hashem, you're mentally in a good space, which is going to protect you from stopping to do the good behavior and chas v'sholem pouring back into the bad behavior. But Hashem is going to actually bring you into intimacy with Him. You're going to stand mamish in the presence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And when you stand in the presence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you literally become one with Him. And that's how you explain Al Pi Chasidus. Vihotzasi means I'm going to take away what's not good. Vihitzalti means I'm going to give you what's good. Viga'alti means I'm going to create a spirit of goodness. And Vilakachti, I'm going to make you one with me. I'm going to finish now, but I'll just tell you a word. I heard this from more than one person. I don't remember this because I'm too young. But I heard this from a number of different people. That you would stand outside the Rebbe's room waiting to go into Yechidus. And you were so nervous. You were so nervous. Going into the Rebbe was not easy because the Rebbe's power was incredibly calm and incredibly gentle. When you went into the Rebbe's room in Yechidus, Adin Even Yisrael is the only person I saw. He says, if you were not in the Rebbe's room in Yechidus, you missed a dimension of the Rebbe which is so different than the Rebbe you saw in public. There's a series of books that I'll never help to give out called Sefer Yechidus. And he interviews a bunch of people, everyone tells stories. But Adin Even Yisrael, in addition to being a genius, was also a very human. And if you're going to read, there's 5 books. If you're going to read one essay, read his. He describes the experience of being close to the Rebbe in the Rebbe's room was a different Rebbe. Anyway, get my point. A number of people said to me, you stand beside that door, you're so nervous, and you're saying to yourself, I'm going to go into the Rebbe, I'm going to forget what I have to say. The Rebbe's going to ask me questions, I'm not going to answer. I'm going to walk out of the Rebbe's room, I'm going to be a blank, I'm not going to have any recollection of what the Rebbe told me. And then she says to me, I walk into the Rebbe's room, and I'm totally calm. Totally calm. Completely calm. In the Ein Anpin, you feel this when you go into the oil. She says, that wasn't me, I was Eis Mensch. The Rebbe brought you into his space, and when the Rebbe brought you into his space, he gave you a sense of calm. That's Vilakachti. Vilakachti means I'm going to give you the knowledge of being at the HaKadosh Baruch. Vilakachti means I'm going to bring you into the presence of HaKadosh Baruch. And when you stand in Hashem's presence, He raises you. And that's the Chassidus of the Da'at L'Shem Shal Geulah. Okay, thank you for listening.
Thank you.
Marif.